Hey, what's up, everyone? My name is David Kelly, and I am the Writing Services Coordinator and Director of the Writing Center at the University of Baltimore. Um, Beyond working at UBalt, I teach writing and sort of other classes based on just different interests. I also like rock climbing, being really active outside. I have a ton of plants. I ride my bike. I like to swim. Um, I don't know what else. What else could I say about what I do beyond UB? I'm reading a lot lately, both for work and for pleasure. So my brain is always feeling like it's gonna explode because there's just so many ideas that I'm sort of always processing in one way or another. I joined the Baltimore Writing Center project. Um, First and foremost, I'll say James and Elaine asked me to join the project as a collaborator to sort of share some of my perspectives and knowledge and expertise as it relates to some of the goals of this project that are centered around anti-racist pedagogy, as well as leaning into minoritized rhetorics and understanding the power of counter storytelling, particularly for those of us who have marginalized identities. And yeah, okay. And so it's in those marginalized identities that some of our voices, some of our stories, the ability of us to tell our stories, the ability of us to know what stories to tell, right, gets stifled, confused, mixed up because of sort of the broad erasure of those identities in spaces like higher ed that is basically centers around leaving our home identities behind and a sort of acculturating into this particular system that is sort of overseen by the tenets of whiteness, if you will. And so again, my purpose in this is to show up as myself, and through just being like moving in a state of being. My hope is that that this demonstrates the possibilities for others, as well as acknowledges like the shoulders that I'm standing on and how like others had to be in this position or in similar positions so that I can be in this position. And so, and even more so at the point of storytelling, I'm interested in your stories. I'm interested in your experiences and how those things are show up in your work at the Writing Center, how those things show up in your presentations in life. Because again, most of us minoritized peoples have had to take a second, third, fourth seat to the primary story of the white man, right? And so as a part of acknowledging and reclaiming our stories need listeners. And I'm also here to be a listener of those stories and to internalize those stories and to help us make sense of those stories if need be, as they're situated against institutional context, this context, that context. And so the two readings that I did, or I listened to I watched the YouTube video by I forget her name, The Danger of a Single Story, as well as I read Making Commitments on Racial Justice. And just to sort of double down again, coming back to our stories, minoritized stories, hegemonic stories, the danger of a single story is that what I took from it is, the danger of a single story is that it limits our ability to think outside that story. It positions ourselves, the one story positions individuals who are not in that story to reflect their realities through the lens of the single story, even if it's contradictory and incompatible with the one story that we are sort of engaging with. And so one of the things that I liked about the YouTube video by Adichie, did I say that right? Adichie, is her sort of unpacking of how she learned about stories through this very narrow lens, and then it impacted how she told her own stories. And it impacted how she navigated through spaces sort of with the understanding of this one sort of archetypical story when that story did not necessarily align with her experiences. And so as I listened to that, or watched and listened to that YouTube video, it made me think about more directly the commitments to racial justice, the commitments, how we're making racial justice commitments actionable, the WPA article. And sort of the distinctions in that article that are made of about, what is it? Let's see, narrative storytelling, and then transformational. Is that right? A confessional narrative versus transformational narratives, and sort of the pros and cons of what is it? I messed up. The pros and cons of confessional narratives, right? They let people know that we were here, the situational context of the thing that demonstrates our work to fight against oppression and racism and all the other isms, right? But there are also limitations that the article points out about it, about sort of narrative, confessional narratives. And one of those, can I find where it was? I just had it. Right, namely that confessional narratives trap us between victim saviors and villains heroes. And so in one sense, confessional accounts can be a bit reductive because it's told through this sort of singular, no pun intended, but this seemingly singular lens that puts us at odds with the object, with the ism, with the system, it creates a, as the article kind of says with the example, it creates these dichotomies that are seemingly hard, or that tend to I feel like they gridlock us into these positions, into these roles, into a cast of actors, if you will. We become a cast of actors playing into the roles when confessional accounts don't go beyond confession, right? And so, the article goes on to talk about shifting the narrative to sort of transformational, where is it? To transformational narratives, but namely, the part that I liked was doing it through articulating commitments. And so that takes it from just it being a sort of a recollection, reflection, or recounting to something that we can take actionable steps to do in the present. And I think that the first step is obviously the narrative, to begin the myth, to begin our individual myths, as it were. But then the next steps then become some of the bulleted questions from the article. What values, attitudes, and actions can and must we practice for anti-racism? How can we experience and act from joy in pursuit of racial justice? And how can we mobilize joy to sustain leverage, to sustain and leverage our commitments over time, right? But doing, sort of responding to these questions, right? These commitments becomes the work that the article further says, which is, there's self-work, there's work with others, there's institutional work, there's leveled work. So it locates the work. By going through the questions, we can locate the work that we can do through particular contexts. Which then allow us to decide how to then continue to make them more actionable, more concrete. And I think the last thing that I think was interesting about this article is that even when we make our commitments actionable, because of sort of dialectic thinking, and the sort of, what does it say? We understand dialectic. Well, actually, I'll read this section briefly. The framework grows out and responds to the need for dialectic thinking, of residing in a liminal space, both and, drawing on Papa, Singh, Hao, and Papa. We understand the dialectic as simple dualism, not as simple dualism, but conceptualizations of four elements: contradiction, motion, totality, praxis. Together, these elements help us understand how seemingly contradictory stances and moves are not only necessary, but also mutually constitutive, I think that is, and supportive. The dialectic framework helps us value, for instance, where we are, and at the same time aspire to where we would like to be. And so, what I take from that, and this is sort of evidence through my own, just like my literal experience, I'll read an article and, I'll read something, I'll partake in an experience, and sort of based on what I describe as, the questions that I can ask myself about the work that I can do, I sometimes feel like I'm doing contradictory work, namely in the writing center when I'm working with students and I see things happening and I know that they have to graduate their class or they're trying to pass their assignments, but there are bigger stakes sort of at the level of, it's about more than just getting the assignment done. It's about the ways of thinking and how we're thinking about things, and how our experiences show up in the work that we do, how we give space to students to share their experiences and bridge those experiences with their disciplines, even though many of their experiences are not recognized, considered by their disciplines. And so, on one hand, I want to do everything that I can to help the student get a good grade, even though that's not necessarily my responsibility, but do the work, right? Do the work, give the feedback, and then they can do something with that will ultimately impact their grade. And at the same time, there are bigger socio-political implications for engaging in writing, whether it's in academia, whether it's at work, whether we're civically involved. There are real implications for language privileging, whose language and whose voices are heard, that we all have to grapple with in our varied positionalities, environments. And so those are just some of the things that I was thinking about as I was reading the article, right? And so even in the contradiction, right, as I sort of described the contradiction, motion, totality, praxis, I'm always looking to challenge my own thinking, challenge the thinking of students, reflect on what I'm bringing and showing up and how that plays out or how that contributes to what a student can take away or not, like how I present a conversation or a way of knowing. And sort of always remembering to, as much as I can, to center the student, to center their experience, to center their knowledge base, to center, their disciplinary expertise. And so I guess my question, and so sort of transitioning to end this, where am I with time? I don't know where I am with time, but in closing, I think the only questions that I have for you all that I would be interested in are the questions on any of the questions on page 7. Because I think that these questions in particular are a good way to locate ourselves, in, I don't want to say this work, but to locate ourselves in this work, in this context, so that we can begin to assess and reflect on where we are, so that we have a better understanding of where we want to go. And so again, not again, but I didn't say this at the beginning. I apologize that I couldn't be here with you all this morning. I'm actually, by the time y'all probably watch this, I will be teaching my high school kids. I'm teaching a social entrepreneurship class, and they have to identify something that they're pissed about. And my goal, as well as the other facilitator professors' goals, are to help them take their ideas and to expand them and turn them into pitch proposals over the course of like however many months. And so I look forward to meeting you all next week. I look forward to engaging with you all. I look forward to sharing our stories. I look forward to hearing your thoughts about, these artifacts that we'll be engaging with, and hearing your perspectives and sharing perspectives. And so I'll pause here at the point of rambling, but I wish you all well, and I will talk to you all soon.